Hola, mi gente. My name is Maria Lopez Twina. I'm the author of the bilingual children's chapter book and animated family series, Mariví the Master Navigator, and the creator of this new podcast, Navigating Dos Mares, or Navigating Two Seas. Mariví the Master Navigator was created for all immigrant families, but especially for children who are growing up with two cultures and two languages, navigating life for themselves and their foreign-born relatives. This podcast was created to help us older kids, or the adult children of immigrants, better understand our childhood experiences and the impact that they've had on our lives. In this episode, we'll hear our guest share their story about growing up bilingually and biculturally, and how their childhood experiences became their superpower. Thanks for joining our community. Bienvenidos. In this episode, we'll be speaking to Mike Roca, Executive Director of the Cross-Cultural Center of Excellence at the Omnicom Media Group. Mike, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Maria.
Yeah, I'm excited. Super excited to talk to you about your youth, which informs so much of our adulthood, and we don't spend enough time talking about it. So tell us about yourself, your background, your household growing up, etc.
Yeah, I had a really nice kind of, upbringing. I grew up in Queens, in New York. I am the youngest of four boys, raised by a single mother who is just a rock star. Both my parents are from Guatemala. They immigrated to New York City in the late 60s. My two elder brothers, they lived in Manhattan. My two elder brothers were born in Manhattan. But me, since I'm the youngest, and my other brother, who's probably 2 years older than me, we were both born in Queens, right? Things like that. But actually, we really had a nice upbringing. I went to public school, and the great thing about New York, the schools were well funded, so you really got a great education, and there was a lot of diversity. So I always saw representation. I saw folks that spoke Spanish, And the most interesting thing about growing up in Queens was, folks automatically think hey, I'm Latino from New York, I'm automatically Puerto Rican. I'm like, no, I'm actually from Guatemala. And I used to always get jealous of the Puerto Rican Day Parade because, all the folks who we knew who were Puerto Rican would go, in June and have that big parade in Manhattan. And I always joke around with my mom, like, Mom, why isn't there a Guatemalan parade? And my brother's like, well, it would just be the five of us holding, the flag. So special. And, I look back with great pride that my parents made the best decision, right? And the reason why they moved to Queens was they wanted us to get a great education. So let us go to where there's really good public schools. And, I went to Forest Hills High School, which is a great high school in Queens. I went to St. John's University. And at that time, I thought I wanted to kind of go into journalism. I majored in business and in communications. And I got an internship my sophomore year. I really wanted to get into journalism. I had reached out to CBS to see if I could kind of get into their journalism program. And I got in. And I got an internship at the Evening News with Dan Rather.
Amazing background, and so many interesting things that you've said that I want to just pivot back to for a second. So the story of Mariví. So it sounds to me like, and tell me if I'm wrong, that from a school experience perspective as a child, your issue wasn't feeling as an outsider because you were Hispanic. On the contrary, it was more because within the Hispanic community, you were Guatemalan. That's where the difference was. Is that the same thing to say?
That was a very big difference because when kids would come to my house and my parents would make tamales, during Christmas, they're like, "What's this?" They did not know what that was because it was not, of customs and especially in the Caribbean, there wasn't a big thing. Although I know there are different forms of tamales everywhere, but the ways the tamales from Guatemala were very unique.
So what was the household like in terms of the overarching ethos? So was it very much a Latino household, very collective, all about family? And did you have any cultural clashes when you wanted to do American things or act American? Was it ever perceived as you're being selfish, not independent? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it was always of the collective mindset, right? So it was always about the we versus the me. My mom, she's just amazing in terms of so ambitious, so just a go-getter, but she would help anyone in need. So we always had relatives stay with us for long periods of time. If they came from Guatemala or they came from Miami, they would stay with us and kind of get, their kind of, things together. And she'd always offer a helping hand. So we always had Spanish in the house, always spoken. I always say, like now that I'm, in this industry for so long, every time I go to like a Univision up front, I see Jorge Ramos, I instantly remember my childhood because I remember just watching the evening news on Univision, and just that was kind of where we got a lot of our news from, and it was Spanish was always in the background, like the novelas growing up, were, first of all, they were just great, right? Like the 90s novelas are launched so many careers, but they're so famous. And a lot of them were just things where, my mom would be watching them and my brothers and I would just be in the living room, just kind of, co-viewing with her. But we always had a very strong grasp of who we were and where we come from, because my mother made it a point for us to go to Guatemala every summer. So it was interesting because, in school I had my Latino friends, but predominantly, again, it's a very Irish, Italian neighborhood. So we were always, I don't think we were like cast aside or anything. I think it was very inclusive. So I never experienced any type of prejudice at all. I actually experienced it when I went to Guatemala, because they would see us as the gringos, right? They would see us as the Americans. Our Spanish wasn't the Spanish, like, you have an actual like American accent when you speak Spanish, or, just things that we weren't used to when we first started going when we were little. But like, obviously we would go every summer. So we would grow up with my cousins in Guatemala. So like there, I became very close with all of them. And it was just interesting in terms of the duality that we played. We would go there, I would speak fluent, perfect Spanish. And then once I would get to New York, I would kind of lose some of it because I wasn't speaking it outside of the house as much as I would when I was there. So that is something that I hold with me now, because I'm a parent of 3, and, I am now living in Miami. So it's something where we're trying to instill in our kids, like the language is important, right? Because it allows you to communicate with the elders in the family, with just not even elders, just anyone in the family, and retain the culture and have that other, I feel like every language you speak, it's almost another life that you're living. It's like another form of yourself, because you're able to that communication opens up so much more, and it just makes it more richer.
Agreed. What language did you speak with your brothers?
We spoke English.
You spoke English, yeah.
We spoke English, and to my mom we would speak Spanish. She would only speak Spanish to us. Yes, yeah, we did. Because my mother's obviously her native language is Spanish. She did speak English and she could defend herself. But like in the school setting, like when, high school applications or her going to school, like there would have to be, me and my brother Dave, he's the one who's 2 years older than me. We definitely would have to kind of translate sometimes, like parent teacher night, like if she wasn't understanding some of the feedback that, that the teachers were telling her, we would have to translate, or we wouldn't do it in front of the teacher. We'd probably do it on the ride back home, like, like what actually was going down. And she knew if we were trying to lie to her, like if the teacher was giving negative feedback or anything, but sometimes we weren't in the room, but sometimes we were allowed in the room. So it depended on the teacher, but we would do some types of translations there, or at the doctor's, or at, anywhere where she felt that she needed really to kind of understand what was going on, like we would help help her out.
If you think back, did you always feel more American because of your name? What do you feel? What did you feel as a child, and what do you feel today in terms of your ethnicity or Americanism, if you will?
I do, because I also knew a lot of Miguels when I went to Guatemala, and I wasn't a Miguel, I was a Michael, like that was my name. So it was, even though the way that folks would pronounce my name in Spanish, like was this weird, like Michelle, or like they would never say, yes. That was the pronunciation. So I did feel growing up, especially in Queens, in a predominantly like Italian neighborhood where there were so many Mikes, right? That was the most popular name growing up, was Mike. So for the most part, everyone would call us by our last name, Roca. That's how we were, kind of, labeled. It was this Roca, like if it was my brother or myself. But that our last name is really what attached me to our heritage and our culture. Like knowing that was the name that, so many generations in Guatemala, and we have, my parents actually have a family album book of the generations that we do have in Guatemala. See how far the name stems back is incredible. But that really was what kind of latched me onto my Hispanic, culture side of, who I am, right? The first name always, was something where I knew that, and I learned that story as I grew up. My parents would say, like, that's why we gave you those names, right? Because so you could feel part of, the rest of the culture that you were growing up with.
In other areas like dating or other activities that maybe Americans do earlier or Americans do differently, anything that stands out? Any memory?
So like there were like, for example, no, like we could never sleep over at anyone's house. Like that was a big no. There were just things where like you can't go into bedrooms. Like if you're in the house, you're in the living room where you could be seen. So like if you brought a girl over, like in the living room, and then also like just there's so many cultural cues, right? That you know your mom, like if you have a Latina mom, she's looking at things through so many different angles. Because she grew up in a different generation and in a country that it's very conservative.
That's right.
Right. So it's like very conservative values, and that was instilled into us at a very young age in terms of like no tattoos, no piercings. Like I remember my older brother, Robert, like he came in with a piercing once and my mother flipped her script. Like it was just, I was like, I still remember that moment. But yeah, we grew up in that environment. That was, like, again, like a single mother. So that also added another different layer to us because we didn't grow up with my father, that we had so much respect for women. So dating was very different in terms of like, we were just not just going around just dating anyone. Like because we had so much respect for our mom. Like that's like it was instilled in us to treat, women a certain way. Right. So that was a big part of growing up with 4 boys, and now I have 2 girls, and I learned girl culture is so different, than the way we grew up. Because the other interesting part too of growing up was we had my aunt and uncle who lived next door. So they lived next door to us, and they had 2 boys. So 6 boys growing up together.
That's a lot.
And my uncle did play a father figure to us, so it was great to have him around. And my aunt, because my mother, again, being a single mom, growing up with raising 4 boys, she was always working. So my aunt played, like a second mother to us growing up. So that was pivotal. That was important for us.
Yeah, sure. And the collective again supporting.
Yeah, it takes a village.
Yeah, it takes a village. Do you have a sense of retroculturating at all? I know you have to presuppose that you left the culture at some point to return to it, but did you get that sense, or were you always supported in a world where you didn't feel like you had to leave your Guatemalan roots or your Latino side?
The short answer, yes, big time. So growing up in Queens, in New York, yes, it's a melting pot. But it wasn't until I moved to Miami where I was like, wow, that is where I definitely have retro acculturated.
Interesting.
Because the beauty of Miami is that, again, it's over 70% Latino, right? So like, and the Hispanics in Miami run everything. And you know this, right, Maria? Like everything from politics to business. And I did not see that growing up in New York City. The biggest business I would see a Latino run would be like a bodega, but never like be the mayor of the city and the superintendent of, you would never see that. You would never see that representation at the highest, positions in politics, business, and other aspects. And then the language was just omnipresent. It was just everywhere. Everywhere it's Spanish. So that was for me a big point of retro acculturation. Also aligned with my career path too, because I moved to Miami in 2006. I had started my career in general market, right, at Starcom MediaVest. But when I moved to Miami, that's where I started at OMD Latino. So that was my first position in multicultural. So it was the fact that I moved to Miami, this very Hispanic city. I started a position at OMD on multicultural. So it was added my media fundamentals plus now this whole cultural aspect of what we're doing was a double whammy for me in terms of that retro acculturation phase. And I definitely do feel that if it wasn't for me moving to Miami, I wouldn't kind of be the person I am today. It definitely added a different layer to who I am. And then, meeting my wife, who is from Nicaragua, born and raised. So she, native Spanish speaker, but grew, she went to an American school. So she's 100%, bilingual. That was just another aspect.
How have you turned your childhood cultural, and I'm not going to say challenges really, but the cultural inputs that you have into a superpower today?
Yeah. It's a great question, right? Because you see the sacrifices your parents make in terms of moving to a country where you've never been before, right? Like how my mom went from Guatemala City to New York City, at the time with our father at such a young age, not knowing the language. Wow, you're taking major risks. You're leaving your comfort and just going out there and seeing what's to come, right? And she worked so hard to raise us. That instilling that in us has made us kind of who we are, right? So every decision I make and everything that I do now that I'm in a position actually to give back, is really important because the onus is on us, right? And I tell, this week I taught at Columbia University, and it was a bunch of, high school students who are taking this college level class, and I was just exposing them to the world of media, but it was an international group of students. So it was really cool to kind of get a different glimpse of where they were coming from. But it's universal in terms of the onus is on, nothing's going to be given to you, right? In this world, nothing is going to be given to you. And I always say I've heard this actually from my Black Afro-American friends, the phrase a closed mouth doesn't get fed, right? Yes. You have to speak up. You have to, although you're shy or you're, you're just not comfortable in areas where you have to kind of raise your voice, you have to, because nothing's going to be given to you. So that is something I learned along the way. If you don't ask, you don't get. And it's helped me in terms of getting to where I am, right? So dealing with different people. And that was another point of my discussion with them was, we're talking so much about tech and AI, but at the end of the day, this is still a people business, what we're in, right? You have to know how to deal with people. You have to know how to communicate. You have to know how to negotiate, broker. And those are things that I learned at an early age where, coming into corporate America for me was another pivotal moment, because that's when I really did feel, I was of other. It was the first time where I felt like, wow, I am not like, although I grew up in Queens in a very diverse community, this is the first time where I remember that first class of assistants at MediaVest. I was the only Latino. I remember the first time where I really felt like I was other was when someone had asked me if I could translate to the cleaning lady in terms of how they want their office to be cleaned. And I was like, wow, this is, and I developed relationships with the cleaning people at the office, with the front desk, because that's where I saw diversity. It was at like those positions, and I fostered relationships, and they always took care of me. They always took care of me. And I still, that is still a strong part of, no matter what level you are, you treat people with the same respect, right? If they are the CEO, the president, or if they're cleaning the office, you give the same respect to everyone. So, those are things that you learn from parents who immigrated here, who, you see that in like when I walk into a hotel and I see the cleaning staff, I always make an effort to say hi. How are you doing?
Yeah. The importance of validating.
Yeah.
So important, right? This has been great hearing your story, and I got to thank you. But anything else you want to share?
No, I got to thank you for creating Mariví. I think, so many folks, so many kids, and I think different generations are going to relate to her journey, right? No matter if you're Latino or if you're, from Nigeria, from wherever country, I think that universal nature of belonging and just knowing that you're walking a fine line of two different worlds and not wanting to give up either is important to so many folks nowadays, right? Because I think we're living in a world where it's all about intersectionality and identity, and you can relate to so many different identities, but they form one identity, right? Who you are.
That's right.
So that's something that I'm trying to instill in my kids, of not forgetting who they are, because they're living a way different life than I lived, right? So I'm trying to instill a lot of some of the hard knock mentality of growing up a kid in Queens for these kids who are growing up just a complete different life. But no, thank you, Maria, for having me.
Oh,
this has been great.
All right. And if any listeners want to get in contact with Mr. Mike Roca, you can find him on LinkedIn. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Maria.
Thanks for listening, and please join us on our next episode of Navigating Dos Mares. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel at We Are Mariví, or check out our books on our website, wearemariv.com.